Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Behind the Scenes, Open Scholarship. This is a collegial workshop on open scholarship and education practices. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities, examine research questions, projects happening all across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream to both YouTube and Zoom. So those of you joining us there, if you have any comments or questions, just pop those into the chat. We'll do our best to read those out a little bit later. And those of you here in the space, just raise your hand and we'll run a microphone over to you so that everyone can hear. Okay. With that, it's very much my pleasure to welcome into Fourth Space, hand our microphone over to the Associate University Librarian, Open Scholarship, James Moore. James, it's great to have you.
Good to be here. Thank you, sir. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Moore, Associate University Librarian of Open Scholarship Initiatives here at Concordia. This collegial workshop on open scholarship and education practices is happening at Concordia through the efforts of many people. I want to highlight the efforts of a few specific people at Concordia, such as Dr. Nicolas Alessandroni, Open Science Working Group, Dr. Krista Byers-Heinlein, Research Chair in Bilingualism and Open Science, and the library's very own Dr. Rachel Harris, who unfortunately could not join us today. All of these people have been steadfast champions of open scholarship here at Concordia. In 2010, Concordia became the first Canadian university to make a formal resolution to embrace open science and open scholarship. In May 2025, Concordia Senate unanimously approved a new resolution that expands the university's commitment to open access. The new resolution promotes a broader range of open practices to democratize access to knowledge and to bring greater transparency to research across the university and across Canada. Our peer Canadian universities are also doing some fantastic work leading the charge in the open access development. For example, the University of Ottawa Hart Institute has a specific meta research and open science program. McGill University established the Tenenbaum Open Science Institute, or the TOSI, at the Neuro to Accelerate Discovery in Neurological Disorders. And Athabasca University established the Athabasca University Press, Canada's first open access university press. My experience as a former public library director gave me firsthand knowledge of how open scholarship can strengthen the relationship between great universities and their local communities. I spent the last 8 years leading the San Mateo Public Library in Silicon Valley. It was the first US public library to launch a biotechnology center. The library still hosts a biotechnology lecture series that regularly features top researchers from Stanford and UC Berkeley. These esteemed researchers are so thrilled to speak directly to curious and interested community members about topics such as healthy aging and the possibilities of nanotechnology to improve human health, that they usually turn down any offers of payment. They do it for the opportunity to test the relevancy of their research in the real world. And they do it for the reward of having a positive impact on the lives of the people they live and work amongst. So without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you. So glad to be working with you. Happy International Open Access Week, everyone. And welcome to Behind the Scenes, a collegial workshop on open scholarship and education practices. My name is Ryan Van Haustein, he, him, and I'm the interim director at Concordia University Press, a nonprofit open access publisher based in this very building in the Concordia University Library. I first want to thank everyone behind the scenes at Fourth Space for always being such welcoming and professional hosts. Thank you to everyone attending online and in person here at Fourth Space. We're grateful for your interest and for your support in open access and open scholarship. In addition to the people that James was just thanking, and thank you, James, I really do want to thank Chai Sok, one of our open educational resources students right here, for all the work of keeping the show running, and also to Zoe Copy right beside me, sorry, Van Haustein. There we go. For really stepping in and helping me as a sort of substitute teacher for this event to fill in. So what we hope to do today is showcase excellent work that benefits students, educators, and the public, and additionally bring some clarity to what we mean when we say things like open access, open scholarship, open science, etc. We'll be providing details about concrete projects, their uses, their intended audiences, and the very real labor that goes into this work. I think we all know that work in educational environments can sometimes be obscured by jargon and buzzwords, and we can get a bit siloed into our own areas of expertise. So today we're aiming to keep things grounded, and we'll pull back the curtain on the physical, digital, and financial infrastructure that is required to produce open access works. Now, when we say open, we generally mean free content that is available in some kind of electronic format. This could be in the form of free textbooks for students. The OER students right here will be talking about that. Free journal articles by academics, free peer-reviewed scholarly books. This is something that Concordia University Press does, along with Athabasca University Press. Or, free resources for learning new skills or sharing guidebooks, recommended better practices for instructors, for teachers. Today's event intends to highlight how different professions are working towards similar goals. I must admit that when I started at Concordia University Press in 2019, my knowledge was very much limited to book publishing. I was almost entirely ignorant of the extent of efforts in open access that were being produced by libraries, by centers for teaching and learning, by educators, by students, and by the general public. So our discussion today is really focused on efforts at the university level to make education more affordable, to build bridges between the academy and the public, to help share substantiated material with people around the world who might not have the same privileges as those of us here today. Open access also helps in situations such as the pandemic, when people were unable to access physical materials, and with ongoing tariff and counter-tariff saber rattling and potential supply chain disruptions. Open scholarship, open data, open science, and open educational resources continue to be available regardless of the borders of nation states. In large part, these commitments to barrier-free access to high-quality material is motivated by a belief that people have a right to education and that the existing costs of education are too high. For many students, a $350 textbook can be the difference between whether or not they're able to make that month's rent. I remember those situations as a student myself. An open education resource can not only make their lives easier, it can also teach people who are unable to afford post-secondary tuition. So one of the common things that I hear when I tell people that I work at an open access publisher is that they'll say, oh yeah, I remember that I wanted to keep reading work in my field, but I lost my library privileges as soon as I graduated. This is a way for people to continue in lifelong learning and education. A huge part of all of these endeavors is to get good information, research, and analysis out into the world to counter disinformation and push back against commercially motivated forces that are pricing people out of the right to learn. So for the format of today's event, we have, for the most part, grouped our participants in pairs. So people who do similar work at different institutions. So we can compare notes about similar kinds of work and share successes and challenges. We encourage each pair to ask ask their counterpart questions to additionally draw out details, share similarities or differences in the work that they do. And we encourage everybody to share information about their intended readerships, their audiences, who they're trying to reach. We have about 10 participants today. a number that I think is a good sign about the range of open scholarship and open educational resources and all that work that's being done. But since there are so many of us, we're going to divide this event into 2 blocks of participants with time for questions at the end of each group. So to ensure everyone has time to discuss their work, we're going to ask participants to keep their presentations to 5 minutes. I'm going to start us off because I've already been yammering on. But first, I'll introduce our first group of participants. I am paired with MacKinley Darlington, she, her, who is joining us today on Zoom. MacKinley is the interim director at Athabasca University Press. We're going to be talking about book and journal publishing. Next to me right here is Kapina. They, them, is a fine arts student at Concordia University and a member of the Open Educational Resources team working out of Concordia's library. Beside them is Cathy Fang, she, her, is a student in psychology at McGill University and involved with the OER program at McGill, as well as a number of open science initiatives. And then to my right is Leigh-Ann Butler, she, her, is the scholarly communications librarian at the University of Ottawa, where she supports the library's journal publishing services, the institutional repository, and OA investments. So I'll just jump into the slides then, slide deck. I think, here we go. So yeah, so Concordia University Press. We were launched in 2016 by the Concordia University Library. James alluded to many of the efforts that were happening here at this institution to encourage and to support open scholarship and open access. Our first book came out in January of 2020. So when we're talking about challenges, it was certainly a challenge to see this first book gain some traction and some steam. It's Everything is Relevant by Ken Lum at the bottom of that stack of books. Great publicity for it for a few months, and then the world had to shut down, right? But then that gave us a chance to kind of really hunker down and work on the following books that have come out. We've since now published 19 titles in both print and in open access editions on our Manifold platform. A little bit more about that in a moment. We also have another 5 books that are approved for publication in 2025 and 2026. So, you know, it's getting busy and we're very proud of what we're doing here. Our print editions are distributed through an agency agreement with the University of British Columbia Press, which means that we're distributed through University of Toronto Press Distribution in Canada, Chicago Distribution Center in the US, and Combined Academic Publishers in the UK and overseas. And I see MacKinley is nodding because same distribution over at Athabasca University Press. So, you know, like one of the hard things about starting off a new place is getting attention, drawing in authors. And I think that we really leaned heavily into humanities and social sciences, like most scholarly university presses do. There's going to be a lot of talk about, I think, open science as well, as there should be. And I do really want to credit the scientific community and journals publishing for really motivating a lot of the open access sort of groundswell that then eventually, I think the wave sort of moved over towards humanities and social sciences publishing, but it was a more gradual process. I think that there are some things that kind of delayed that a little bit. And in some ways there were some, I think some kind of like cultural expectations about books being these revered objects, as well they should be, but that if you were giving away the book for free, that you were then therefore devaluing the content, or like it maybe wasn't as good. It's the sort of like impression, but I don't think that that's true. Scholarly publishers that are publishing in open access are still following the same rigorous standards of peer review as publishers that have a print only or a sales only model. So in some ways we had to kind of do some correcting work to demonstrate that these were high quality print editions, but that open access could also operate in tandem with a print program. So I really do think that Concordia University Press was almost a bit of an experiment. Like, let's just see, is it gonna work? One of our successes, I have to say, is that we've had to reprint 5 of the 19 books that we so far have in print. And a couple of those we've had to reprint advice. So, and you know, we're really kind of using the standard sort of modest initial print runs of scholarly books because we know that those are for very niche audiences. Often though, those niche books then connect with a larger readership of the general public. But Concordia University Press, I think, also is a bit of an experiment because we differed from the way that Athabasca University Press established itself, which it was 2007. Is that right, McKinley? Yeah, okay. There's a journals program that's a huge part of Athabasca's program, and I can't help but see that as being part of that sort of initial impetus from the sciences and from journals publishing to support open access reading. So then we're launched about 10 years later, and I think that's where you can start to see that there's a greater acceptance or further support or recognition of the need for open access book publishing. So I'm going to just jump to my next slide there. I'm talking about some of these common misperceptions, you know, like, so for a lot of university presses, I feel like a common question is, oh, do you only publish, you know, work for the university? Like, no. We are usually nonprofit corporations that are within the university, or we are separate units of that university. So we're actually publishing books that are from authors that are all around the world. And then there's also this perception that because, and I think from the journals programs that ceased their print operations once they moved to an OA model, that meant that you weren't publishing your books in print anymore. So that is also not the case for us. And then, you know, like there was also this sort of concern, I think, from a lot of publishers that had print-only programs or sales-only print programs, that it would mean that the books wouldn't sell. And there's been sort of some longer term studies about this so far that have indicated that it either makes little difference or that it can increase the sales. Now, I think that really comes down to a lot like what kind of book was published, right? So I kind of wanted to talk to McKinley a little bit about this too, where I feel like some edited collections often are much more difficult to then promote and sell because they're more like journals. So people are reading, say, like an article within them instead of the whole thing. So there's, I think, some cases where it's probably true that we're not selling as many of certain kinds of books. But I wanted to also just sort of transition this over to the fact that Athabasca does have a journals program as well. But I also wanted to ask kind of McKinley, maybe just like, you know, off the bat before we transition over to your discussion. I know that you also have a literary program and you publish poetry and you publish memoirs. And I know that open access works for a lot of very, I'd say like community-oriented work that's often in a nonfiction register for educational purposes. But I know that open access isn't necessarily the right fit for all kinds of books, like authors who try to make a living from writing poetry or from their writing practices, right? So the future can be open access for many kinds of books, but not necessarily for all. And I was kind of curious about your authors and whether or not they do publish their work under open access Creative Commons licenses, if it varies. So I'll bow out and I'll pass the mic over to McKinley. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Ryan. Nice to see everybody on the panel. I really appreciate the invitation to be here and to speak about what we do at AU Press and how, how the sort of the Canadian context is really shifting more towards open and how we are embracing that. Sort of short answer to Ryan's kind of transition question here is we actually do publish our trade, our literary works in open access as well. I won't lie, we get a lot more questions when we're going through contract negotiations with folks about that and what that can look like. But we do that as well. We do open access for sort of all of our all of our manuscripts. We also take those through peer review, the same peer review process that we take our scholarly works through. The only exception for us in terms of the peer review process is our Writing in Residence series, which features artists invited to Athabasca University's virtual Writer in Residence program. So they don't go through the same sort of peer review process, but we have other quality assurances built in place. I'm happy to share actually some stats around sort of, what you were alluding to earlier about like open access doesn't negate sales of print copies. So an example from our Writing in Residence series actually is Indigiqueerness by Joshua Whitehead in dialogue with Angie Abdu. We've sold 2,000 copies of that, print copies of that. That work is also available for download from our website, and we've seen that downloaded about 150 times. So print still is sort of leading with, but it is really dependent on the type of work that's being published. So this is, I think a really interesting sort of data points for us to think about when we're promoting open access, that especially for the literary works and more of our trade titles. But, wonderful. Okay, I'm going to jump into a little bit about AU Press, and let's go from there. Let's find my notes. Okay, so we are Athabasca University's open access scholarly publishing house and Canada's first open access scholarly press. We are committed to making research and scholarship freely accessible through the publication of books and journals in open access. Athabasca University is Canada's open university, and as such, we have students, staff, and faculty situated across the country. So this idea of open is really embedded in as who we are as an institution and how the press came into existence and then has evolved to where we are today. So founded in 2007, AU Press was Canada's first digitally born open access publishing house. We incorporate many of the traits of traditional university press publishing and combine them with an innovative approach to dissemination that focuses on digital publishing. However, under the AU Press imprint, our goal is to produce content that explores new ideas in history, literature, and culture in high-quality print and digital formats. We've published over 190 books, 7 journals, and 2 website publications. We embrace opportunities to work with established mid-career and emerging authors on monographs, journals, and edited collections. We also welcome projects that require us to be creative and reimagine our processes in order to realize the goals of the creators that we work with and to better illustrate the many forms that modern scholarship can take. To further complement, we could probably switch to the next slide, and you can see a couple of examples of our recent titles. There. Oh, sorry, I am behind. But anyways, I'll go back sort of to the previous slide. There's one note on there about our Remix imprint, which is our OER imprint, which we recently launched. So through our Remix imprint, we publish open educational resources that are written and adapted by Athabasca University faculty for use in AU courses. This initiative helps us further integrate and meet the needs of our home institution, Athabasca University. And since its launch in 2024, we've seen over 10,000 total book downloads and over 6,500 active users in our online reading platform, and we use Manifold, the same as Ryan was mentioning what they use. So our journal program, we can switch to the next slide now, sorry. So I flagged here 2 of our feature publications from our journal program, the International Review of Research in Open and Distributed Learning, ERODL, which is the highest ranked open access education and journal in Canada, and Labor Le Travail, I'll refer to it as LLT, which is widely recognized as a leading journal for labor history in Canada. So in 2024, ERODL had over 250 visits to their website, where you are able to download the content, and LLT had over 336,000 articles downloaded from their website. I will say, though, that these journals approach OA differently. For example, ERODL is a Diamond Open Access e-journal, while LLT is available in both print and online formats. And the journal permits authors to post the published PDF in an institutional repository 12 months after publication. So definitely different approaches, different sort of evolution of these two journals within that sort of umbrella of open access. I will say though that change is on the horizon for both for all scholarly journals in the Canadian context, as the revised tri-agency open access policy on publications, which is anticipated to come into effect on January 1st, which and it will make open access journal publishing a requirement of receiving funding from the tri-agencies. So we're seeing, this is a big change for us. Previously, it was that 12-month mark that we were working towards. Now it's sort of that immediate open access. So it's a bit of a transition for both researchers, scholars, and also journals and publications. So we are already seeing the influence of this policy change in the most recent Aid to Scholarly Journal opportunity. So to be eligible for this opportunity, it's run through ScholCommLab. Journals must publish in immediate open access without subscription and without APCs and under an open license, or present a plan to transition to immediate open access with without APCs by 2028. So we've got a bit of a transition period. So Arodal, for example, is already in compliance with this requirement. And LLT has developed a robust action plan for their transition. Although again, no two, or at least not these two journals, have the same approach to being fully OA. I think we're going to continue to see a lot of creativity in scholarly journals, and that's something that we certainly embrace here at AU Press. So I'll probably just wrap up here by saying that certainly at AU Press, we are very much in the embrace OA camp and welcome the revised open access policy, not just for our journal program, but also for the positive influence it might have on our scholarly imprint. We hope to leverage our position and reputation as an open access scholarly publisher, while other publishers and publications navigate adherence to revised requirements. We can lean into our established and effective publishing practices and processes, and we can continue to be creative and to further innovate in this space and really embrace openness, not just in open access, but in sort of the shifts we're seeing across a variety of spaces as represented by colleagues here on the call. I think I'll stop there for me.
Thank you so much, McKinley. You mentioned APCs, and I just wanted to do a little reverse engineering of the alphabet soup here. And just say that is article processing charges. So what that often means is that there's a kind of barrier towards producing work in open access because an existing journal will ask an author for a certain amount of money in order to make it an open access article. It's curious to know about this tri-agency model change where they're doing away with APCs, but are they also then providing support for? Okay, right.
Great question. To be determined, I would say, on how that's going to shake out. Thank you. Yes, as I was saying the acronym, I was like, oh no, I've fallen into that acronym usage camp where it's so confusing. So thank you for clarifying that. It's not clear how that will be, sort of implemented in both the research funding side, as well as sort of the scholarly publishing side on the other angle. So I think it's a to be determined kind of phased in approach, as tri-agency often does with policy changes and sort of have future things. Something we're watching closely and hope to engage in that conversation on with more.
Great. That's really helpful. And I know Leigh-Ann is going to be talking a bit more about the infrastructure for Diamond OA. So thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your presentation. And I'm going to turn it over now to Zoe and Cathy beside me, who are ready to talk about open educational resources, i.e. free textbooks.
Hello. Hello. My name is Zoe. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an undergraduate student in fine arts studying design and art history. And I'm also a member of Concordia's OER team alongside Rachel Harris, who can't be here today, unfortunately, and Chai, who's in the back on the couch over there. So we're a team of 3, and we contribute to the open culture at Concordia, namely through these textbooks that you are seeing on screen right now. We have other aspects to our program as well, but if you heard of OER at Concordia, it's most likely through some of these textbooks. So we engage with professors and institutions across disciplines. So some people are here today who have been recipients of our grant workshops, either here or online. Josephine Guan, who is going to be presenting a bit later on, is one of them. And we really value the work of professors and students collaborating to make education free for everyone. Something that we constantly encounter in creating open educational resources is really playing up the amount of money saved, because that's immediate and it's something that a lot of students can relate to. Ryan gave the example of a $350 textbook. That was a real example. And that's one of the many costs of our current educational model that students have to deal with. And so open educational resources kind of radically reframes what education can mean and how to make it more accessible for people. And one of the beautiful things about our selection of textbooks is that though people in the courses are able to use them for the duration of their course, they exist for future reference for anyone, regardless of whether they're at Concordia or have institutional access. As long as you have an internet connection and are able to access the catalog, you are able to gain that knowledge. So we have three models of textbook creation. There's adapt, adopt, and customize. Customize is the more intense one, as it necessitates the entire new creation of a body of work. Adopt, you're using an open textbook that already exists, and adapt is adapting that textbook in some additional capacity to make it unique, either for localization purposes, so if within the Concordia, Quebec, or Canadian context, or changing course material by mixing a couple textbooks together. So these are some of our catalog, and I highly recommend, if you are at Concordia, to take some of the print material that we have in the back that recommends students to give to faculty members to consider using these programs. Our big project that was just recently published, on the next slide, is the guidebook to Pressbooks at Concordia University. And so after you get this wonderful brochure in the back, then thinking, how do I materialize this vision of having a textbook that is free and open to everyone? And we proposed a guide to doing so, because when you receive the grant, it's a lot to initially realize is on the horizon in terms of work. And there are a lot of things that are in a way hidden by just the concept of adopting or adapting a book. But a lot of it requires thought and additional labor. And when you are in the process of doing something on a particular timeline, it's a lot easier to follow a guide in order to better get a glimpse of how this process worked. And so we wrote a book about writing books. We published a book about publishing books, specifically within Pressbooks, which is the software that we use to publish all our books. It was very much a learning curve. I can say from personal experience, and I feel Chai can also attest to, because this was a program that we previously had no experience in. And so we were going in with the perspective of someone that had just received the grant and is also approaching to create a textbook. And so we had to think about aspects like UI design, colors, ensuring that everything was accessible on a multitude of different levels in order for it to be accessible in terms of distribution. So there was quite a lot of fine tuning that went into this. An example is when we were about to launch, it was a couple days until we realized we were completely finished. We had to have a discussion about how we were spelling the word license. And even though we had agreed to Canadian spelling, it was just, you're looking at something so intensely for the period of, it was about a year for me of looking at this book. And realizing like there are still things that even though you have written a book about writing books, is that there will always be more to add and adopt. And so we have this version out, but we are already planning on adding things based on our experience in the course of writing it, as well as what professors and students have asked. So there are quite a few things that I would recommend checking out if you are a grant recipient or would like to know a bit more about the actual publication and design of these books. We have quite a bit of customization, and part of that is due to Chai, again in the corner there. And part of the beauty of open access is that any software that we created, and Chai and Asif in the beginning of 2025 during the winter semester created a plugin to further modify Pressbooks. And that software is open in nature. And so everything feeds into itself in order to better the publication and design experience of professors. And again, you look at the student aspect. In the process of kind of writing this book, and at the beginning of the semester, you know, people are registering for classes. Friends would come up to me and say, like, have you heard of this? And I get to excitedly say, yes. That textbook is part of our catalog and it is completely free. And also you should check it out because like they are created here by Concordia staff and students, and that labor is important to acknowledge and also celebrate. It's quite a lot of work, and to be able to enthusiastically celebrate a textbook that is free to both Concordia students, but also everyone, is an incredibly important thing to have. And I'm very grateful that Concordia has a program like this.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that, Zoe. That's really wonderful to hear about. And I'm curious about how the OER program runs over at McGill.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Cathy. I work for the Student Society of McGill University's OER program. Unlike the ones at Concordia, we are run by one person, which is me. There was a big turnover over the past 2 years. I think the program stopped briefly for 2 years. And previously we had about 3 people on the team, and each person kind of worked on different things, creating different textbooks for different classes. And over the past few years, we've created about 7 OERs. 3 of them are books. Yeah, there's a quotation mark on the books because quite a few of them are actually comparison guides to the paid textbook with the pages and the section for the specific class, and the open textbook pages and the corresponding section, which I think, okay, if I were a student and had to find the corresponding pages on the paid book and on the open book, that sounds like a lot of work. So I made that the goal of my project, is to write them down, actually create books out of the comparison guides, add them, add a digital identifier to them so people can cite them instead of hosting them on Google Drive. I've uploaded to Open Science Framework, which is a repository that automatically assigns a DOI. And how do we assess students' needs? We distribute a course nomination form. So we briefly discuss why we're doing this, the benefits of OER, and if students want to have an open textbook for their class, they could nominate their class so we could talk to the professors. That's what they've been doing for the past few years, talking to those professors and based on their syllabus, create the OER. And in the past, I think they had some events, but I'm really not sure. It's quite poorly documented, to be honest. So I'm preparing to better document my work and prepare for a better turnover when I finish my job. You can go to the next one. So here are some updates. There's only me.
I like
I
the
have-
strike throughs.
Yep. I have revised 3 OER books and they're openly licensed by the CC BY Share Alike license. And there's a practice question for a biology course. And I'm still working on the curriculum comparison guides and I'm sharing them on OSF. And I've updated the nomination form to make it shorter and more accessible to students in terms of the lingo, the benefits, etc. You can go to the next one. And one of my goals is also create more OER. So based on our nomination form, we'll collect the most frequent ones and I'll reach out to the professor and ideally collaborate with them to create the OER, but if not, they could send me the syllabus and I'll adapt like what happens at Concordia on the open textbook and only select the ones that are covered in the course and upload to our OSF. That's the end of my slides. I have a question for Zoe. Since the SMU OER program only really relaunched very recently, I'm having a little trouble sharing our resources out there, putting our resources out there, although they're on the SUMI website, they are on OSF, they're there. How do you actually make it out there?
So both Chai and I both contribute to outreach and promotion. So we try to have as much of a physical presence in the terms of posters and handouts as we can. A lot of the work that we do is digital. And so trying to disseminate through Instagram, newsletters that Concordia has, and our website. So there's quite a few like different facets, but a lot of it is also directly like connecting to the courses and encouraging students in those courses to then contact other professors that would be interested in participating in like one of the projects. So a lot of it is, you know, traditional on the ground postering as well as physical flyering, but there's a lot of word of mouth as well. And I think it's something that like we definitely every year want to be more ambitious and more daring in how we present these things. And so we're trying to experiment a bit in how we can draw people in. There was an event that we were supposed to run this semester, but we are instead running next semester. That was essentially a game show on how Ryan's laughing because he was going to be the host.
I'm going to do my very best Bob Barker and
Fourth Space is also very excited about it. But part of that would be a game show guessing the price of textbooks. And in exchange, you can win some, you know, open books in exchange through the Concordia University Press. And so kind of thinking this is an issue that a lot of students face. And I feel you particularly can relate to as a psychology student because that necessitates textbooks, is that there are a lot of financial barriers in higher education. And even if we can alleviate some for the time being before, you know, a more different conceptualization of what a university means, then that is a massive help to students. Because it's hard to then conceptualize a greater open field if you've never been impacted by open access. You've never saved that amount of money through not having to buy a textbook. And so it's really thinking about how to change people's minds right now so they can go further in terms of supporting open access. I was also wondering, like, I was looking through the OER website at McGill. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the scientific publishing you do, because we have a bit through it in terms of like the articles that you share and promote.
Thanks, so that's a great question. I recently learned McGill does have a press book, university press, but that's in collaboration with Queen's University. And I've been at McGill for 4 years and I've never heard of it until I really looked it up. So I guess there really isn't a big infrastructure, and our McGill library doesn't really work on OER either. They have an OER website that links our textbooks to them and our nomination form. So for me, really, I adapt previous work and it wasn't really properly contributed, it wasn't properly credited to the authors either. So I'm thinking perhaps OSF would be the best place to submit something that's not official or peer reviewed, but a community work that's can be version controlled, could be shared, could be open. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Well, thank you both very much for sharing the behind the scenes of this important work. What a real great service that is to current students and future students. So I'm going to turn it now over to Leigh-Ann Butler. We've kind of talked a little bit about the infrastructure. We've alluded to article processing charges. All of this good work, how does that even happen? I mean, if you're giving it away for free, you've got to figure out ways to pay for it. So Leigh-Ann's going to talk about much more expert, high-level funding and the infrastructure that goes into allowing us to do the important work that we can do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm really lucky to go last on this panel, actually, because there were threads of the conversation that I think I can weave all together in the work that I do in the library. So I think this was very strategically done, maybe. So my name is Leigh-Ann Butler, and I'm the Scholarly Communication Librarian at the University of Ottawa. And my work, in my work, I focus on all things open scholarship. And I just want to start maybe a little bit in emphasizing that open scholarship is just such a broad term that includes so many different practices. It includes sharing data. It includes even code and open access publications, including protocols, clinical trial registration. So there's quite a bit involved in open scholarship, and that really means a lot of the scholarly communication librarians have a lot of work to do. So I also am a research associate in the ScholCommLab. We have our co-director here, Stefanie Haustein, who's going to be in the second group. And in my research, I focus in on the economics of open access. So we talked about APCs. I've spent years of my life researching the landscape of article processing charges, because there really is a monopoly in terms of the 5 big commercial publishers who charge APCs, and there's a lot of extraction in the academic space in terms of profit. So that's another area, and this is something, it's provided me with like a lens that I bring through my work on the day-to-day as a librarian and at the university. So here is a big focus of my current work in the library is our library publishing program. Most of the journals, and you had asked the question about scientific articles. So that's very much a lot of what I'll be discussing here. The library publishing program includes supporting faculty and student journals that are published on open journal systems. So we were talking about infrastructure. The library, through our consortia and Ontario Scholars Portal, pays for Open Journal System, which is a platform by the Public Knowledge Project and PKP. I'm going to try first to say the full name and then the acronym. PKP has 2 other platforms as well. They have Open Monograph Press for books, And they also have open preprint servers. So open preprint system, a server where folks can deposit or share preprints. But at the library, the majority of our infrastructure for PKP, it's OJS, and we host faculty and student-run journals. The student-run journals include both undergraduate and graduate. So we've just onboarded recently a new student-run journal that is in the field of political science. Here in the screenshot, we have one of our longer-standing student-run journals, the University of Ottawa Journal of Medicine. And we also have University of Ottawa is a bilingual institution. We have the official languages and Institute de Bilingualism here. OLBI is the acronym. And these are two of our, I would say, two of the journals that have a well-established team. And so one of the threads I want to pick up on was the precarity of some of this work. So this really is volunteer work, I would say, currently, because it's not well rewarded, or it's not really embedded in the tenure and promotion system within academia. So it really is done on the side of people's desks, and it lends a lot of precarity to it. And once you have a well-established team that can, as students come in and out, for example, and graduate, once you can pass over the information and the training for the next cohort of students, that will really help secure a little bit more of the ongoing presence of the journal. And so in terms of what the library offers, our service model right now, we provide training on the platform. The library pays the cost of hosting, so the infrastructure itself. The infrastructure is open, and so there's a lot of customization that can be done by the journal teams as well, which I think is a really wonderful feature. We also provide support for discovery and indexing, so that, provides those journals with visibility, and the library can support with applications to indexing databases like the Directory of Open Access Journals. We provide advice as well on open licensing, I would say metadata quality as well, and archiving. So ensuring those journals are preserved. The library is expanding its services now. So I mentioned the two other PKP platforms, OPS and OMP. So here we have a screenshot of a society journal in kinesiology, or a society, in kinesiology. And they have 3 publishing activities currently on PKP platforms. So we have, they have book publishing on OMP. They have a journal called the Communications in Kinesiology on OJS. And they also run a preprint server called Sport Archive. And they've lost their funding in the Netherlands. And we have any of the journals that we host, there must be a faculty or a student who is affiliated with the university. So there was a faculty who had approached the library asking if we could provide funding. And I asked, well, why would we provide funding? Well, we have the infrastructure that is funded, but we're not going to give you more money. Instead, we'll migrate over the existing journal. So we're in the works of that right now. It's quite a large project. And we will be the first institution in Ontario with OPS, so the preprint server. So it's really exciting. And this is all being done right now. We'll go to my next slide. But we talked about funding, and here I will dive into that. All of that requires money. And Zoe, you had spoken about the labor. I think we need to, that's a really important point, the labor involved. And I'll get into that shortly. But in terms of the library's OA investments, our current approaches is we negotiate agreements through our consortia, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, so CRKN, also through another consortium in Ontario, OCL, and that provides authors with discounts on article processing charges so they can publish openly. But we also direct a certain pot of money within the budget towards investments in community-run initiatives. So I have a few examples up there. But all of that, I think what we're starting to find is that there needs to be a little bit more strategic direction in terms of how what we're directing our investments towards. So we're also going to be working on developing an OA investment strategy that's very much grounded in the principles of the library, but also the university itself. And some of the emerging agreements are now requiring a little bit more crossover between teams, between collections and scholarly communication. So there's quite a bit of coordination currently being done between those two groups, and then analysis on our agreements itself. But I want to emphasize that these agreements provide authors with a discount on APCs, but we have this open infrastructure that I just pointed to, which enables the faculty to still do this work, to access research, but using open systems. It's just unfortunately not, as I mentioned, well incentivized. So the journals that I spoke about are Diamond OA. The library has only one legacy subscription journal. And I think one of the previous speakers was speaking a little bit about some of the changes with the tri-agency. That journal itself is part of a SCHRC program. So it's going to be transitioning towards open shortly. And then that means all of the journals that we have that we are hosting are open. And the library very much directs quite a bit of money to ensuring that the Diamond OA model flourishes. And one of the key players with those investments in Canada is Coalition Publica, and CRKN and ERUD together work on the Partnership for Open Access. So that provides quite a bit of funding in Canada. I think we're very lucky in Canada to have really robust infrastructure, open infrastructure, but we also have investments. I do think that there can be more, though. I think there needs to be more recognition that the library pours a huge amount of money out towards commercial publishers, and really moving some of that money away towards the existing community-based models, because it really is the folks that are doing the work on that are the experts themselves. And instead of having a huge amount of money leaving academia towards profits, instead making sure that stays within the system and supporting the work that is already being done. They're already performing the review, they're already publishing, but just making sure that stays within the system. And I think libraries can play an important role there by directing funding towards the open infrastructure. But I think there still needs to be quite a bit of work done within the institutions to incentivize and reward that work. That's one of the gaps. So kind of a little bit of culture change, which I think as humans resist. I think that's the biggest barrier is really kind of pushing some of the culture change. So this open infrastructure, all the work that you've been talking about on Pressworks, for example, another form of, I think it's all open, right? Is it open? Yeah. Is properly rewarded. Yeah.
That's a very good way of putting it. I do think it's interesting to be at this sort of strange moment where there's obviously a groundswell of support for more open access, open scholarship, but at the same time, it's sort of like a kind of tepid commitment of funding, right? I do think that you're really wise to be pointing out the opportunity that a lot of institutions, especially post-secondary education, post-secondary institutions with their own libraries, how they can kind of step in to do the things that they would otherwise be spending so much money to, have access to, say, a subscription. For a journal, often in the sciences, so immense, right? But at the federal or the provincial level, are we seeing like a kind of moment where like we insist on more, but we're not going to give a little bit more money, or is it like gradually increasing as the mandate to do more open scholarship? I'm kind of curious about your perspective of like the years.
Maybe there's certain layers there. I think it depends on what level of government you're talking about. So here in Quebec, with the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, there's some money that's directed towards ERUD, for example. So that really is key infrastructure in Canada, I would argue. At the federal level, ScholCommLab has certain programs. I would say, oddly enough, there's more support in the social science humanities with this at the federal level with the tri-agencies. There's a little bit of a gap at CIHR and NSERC. It might have to do with, disciplinary practices in STEM fields and the need within ScholCommLab and SSH to support the transition to OA and the disciplinary practices themselves. So more SSH scholars producing research in long form with books, for example. But I think there's a potential moment right now. There was mention of the revision to the tri-agency open access policy, and they published a draft of this revision earlier this year, and it mentioned that there was the potential requirement for mandating green OA, so institutional repositories where authors would have to deposit to a repository. That would require, I think, really to ensure it functions properly, additional funding, because that work would be pushed down on libraries. And I have to admit, institutional repositories, I think there's a lot of work that can be done to make sure that they're, first of all, user-friendly.
Yeah.
Second of all, that the metadata is of quality.
So people can find the work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they've spoken about discovery layers on top of this to really, ensure that grantees from the tri-agencies, their work can be deposited in a certain platform, just simplify the process. So but the tri-agencies don't love to give extra money to this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't know how much there's extra funding opportunities, but it doesn't have to exist just at government.
Yeah.
We have libraries coming together through consortia, and that form of, collective negotiate, like the consortia can serve to collectively negotiate with publishers. I think there should be a little bit more push to direct the library spending towards more community-based models, because there's a lot of it being lost right now through what are called transformative agreements or read and publish agreements, where these large agreements negotiated mostly with commercial publishers include subscription, but also the publishing piece of the libraries. Technically, it's coming through the library budget, are covering the cost of article processing charges. It's a lot of money. So I think maybe there's a little bit of, like, rather than saying more, stepping back and looking at how we can move around the money.
We are often just moving pots of money around, right? Like, it's just
There's already a lot of it.
right?
There's already a lot of it. It's just how we offer that support,
Yeah.
right?
Okay, that's really helpful. In the interest of time, I know that we have another group, but I wanted to say, if there's any questions from the audience or online for our first group, now's the time to try to get a quick one in, or we can transition to the next group of speakers. But if there's I see a question from James.
I'll just mention also online, if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat. We can read them out. I'll get a microphone over to James.
I hope I phrase this correctly. I'm really interested in the work that's being done, obviously, by Rachel and the two individuals here on OER. And obviously, the output is very low, almost bespoke, and I realize that you're doing what you can and you're getting started. Do you conceive of any path towards scaling that, like to where it could actually have a bigger impact? Because obviously the goal would be for any college student to be able to avoid spending hundreds of dollars on textbooks and just to be able to have affordable or free options. But right now you can do a book or two a year or something like that. So if you, in a perfect world, other than simply just money, how would you imagine that could be scaled further?
I obviously don't speak for the entire team. Rachel isn't here and she's a big component of figuring out the financials and how much funding goes into this, which is really incredible and valued work. And something that like we all appreciate because it's something we don't necessarily deal with. We deal with promoting these free books to students, helping write them, but the entire financial side is something that is always kind of pulled back. And so part of that is one, having more money in order to fund even more grant recipients, but also make the greater university aware through a proper commitment to open education and an incentive past, here's a bit of money in order to get these grants underway, but an actual incentive to use open textbooks. I think that there's a culture that really values the model of like paid access as something that is deemed more worthy than something that is free. And it's something that I, at least personally, have encountered a lot when explaining the work, trying to say, yes, this textbook is free, but it's the same content as something you would pay for. There's no difference in value. And a lot of that is stigma. There's a lot of mental work and community work that has to be done. And that can then translate into advocacy for more of an open policy. I wanted to ask you, Cathy, because your program is run exclusively by you. And I feel you can better speak to your program on how you think that it would function best in a McGill context.
Yeah, so I would just briefly describe where our funding is coming from. I'm paid by the Student Society of McGill University, or the SSMU, and we are funded by student fees. That's about $3 per semester for every undergrad to pay. That's mandatory for them. That's where we get our money. That's where I get my salary. Although it's a part-time job, I, do my job, better adapt the OER. I think in the perfect world, there shouldn't be a job for me. I think all profs should use OER. There doesn't have to be one single book for the course. They could, use snippets of different sections of existing open textbooks. There are a ton out there. There are tons of databases that link to all of those textbooks, but nobody is using them. I actually took a math class. I was surprised to see it. That was an open textbook was used, and it was online instead of having to pay for that textbook that I won't use in the next 50 years of my life, and be very hard to sell too. So in a perfect world, everybody will be using them.
Can I just add one thing? The University of Ottawa now has a new regulation where professors must indicate on their syllabus the cost of textbooks.
Really?
So it is a new regulation, and that is one way to kind of really encourage the transparency in terms of these costs.
Right. Yeah. Actually putting it down.
I think that especially here, when you go to the bookstore at the beginning of the semester, there's this assumption that you have to pay for textbooks. It's just a necessary cost. When I'm currently a student and, in actively applying for scholarships, there's always a box to say how much your textbooks would cost. And I think in an ideal world, that box does not exist. There's no financial need to give financial aid to people to buy textbooks because everything's free. But again, there's this prestige, quote, air quotes, in having to pay for something that requires a radical reframing of what accessible education is. That it's not just something that you have to pay for with, blood, sweat, and tears, and also physical Canadian dollars, but something that is fundamental to us as people and us as learners, and something worth investing in. But again, that requires more promotion of these sorts of projects for people to say this textbook is worth funding, and that encouraging other people to fund other textbooks, and also going through the motions of, again, a cultural shift. So there's a financial aspect to it, but I think there's also a deeper question of educational materials within academia that has to be had.
All right, I think that's a great place to stop, and I just want to thank everybody at this table and McKinley for joining us online. Round of applause for the first group, and let's bring up the second. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Cheers. Thanks for joining. It should be probably on already. Yeah. And great. Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Go. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining for the second group. Now I want to quickly introduce our speakers. On my right over here, we have Krista Byers-Heinlein. She, her is Concordia Research Chair in Bilingualism and Open Science. And she's joined with Nicolas Alessandroni. He, him is a postdoctoral fellow at the Concordia Infant Research Laboratory. And together they co-lead Concordia's Open Science Working Group. They are joined with Stefanie Haustein, she, her, who is an associate professor at the School of Information Studies at the University of Ottawa and co-director of the ScholCommLab, which I remember that Leigh-Ann was just mentioning. And then on my left, I have Josephine Guan. She, her is an educational developer at Concordia University's Center for Teaching and Learning, and is joined by Gabriela Petrov. She, her is an instructor in the Department of Theater here at Concordia University. So we're going to start with Nico and Krista, and they're going to be talking more about open science working groups along with Stefanie here. So thank you. Please jump right in.
Yes, hello. All right, could we get our slides on the screen? Oh, they're already
There you go.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, perfect. That's perfect. Okay, yeah, so thank you, Ryan, for the introduction. It's great to be here, so thank you also for the invitation. So yes, we will be talking about the Concordia Open Science Working Group, some of the recent achievements of the group, and some updates. But we really wanted to reflect a bit on the event theme, right, behind the scenes. We think that's a really interesting title. Like you've
tell us more.
Yes. So what remains hidden in open science, right? What remains hidden in open scholarship? So we're gonna provide some reflections on that. Hopefully they'll be spurring some debate. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, we are going to tell you a bit about a recent research project. So in 2023, I was fortunate to receive an FRQSC postdoctoral fellowship, and that fellowship aimed to measure and describe open science adoption across Canada. And really a lot of the motivation for this work comes from what we were doing already at the Open Science Working Group. How so? Well, because when I joined Concordia as a postdoc 2022, we started with Krista to meet with people and see what they were doing in the open science domain. And there were really these, we like to call them open science pockets. So here and there, you know, people practicing open science, different practices to different extents, but they were not really connected. So people were not aware of what others were doing at the time. So what we did is bring everybody together in this local event, institutional event that we called Open Science at Concordia. And after that conference is that the working group was created. We spearheaded that initiative because we saw people were interested in continuing the discussion, right? And so after learning about the experiences of people at Concordia, we thought, well, we need to extend this kind of you know, research to the national level. And we wanted to know how people were feeling about open science, or what people knew about open science. So this fellowship, we called it Impact Open Science. Impact, there was an initiative to measure perceptions, attitudes, and knowledge of open science in Canada. And here are some results of that, that survey-based research that I did, supervised by Krista. And so just two of the results to discuss. So the first one is we asked people, how would you rate your institution's support for engaging in open science practices? And most people said average, with some people saying above average and excellent. But then, do your institution's tenure and promotion policies value researchers' engagement with open science practices? Well, this is a bit more complicated. Most people said, I don't know. And there's the second group is no. So we think this is important because this signals that what remains hidden or behind the scenes is how much institutions actually value engagement with open science practices when it comes to hiring and tenure processes.
Yeah, and if I could add on to these results a little bit, I mean, I think we've seen here already how much work is being done within institutions on open science. A lot of it is at libraries, but there's work being done across different sectors at the university. So there is support to some degree. It varies across institutions. There's a lot of work being done, but there may be not enough support. There may not be familiarity with the supports that are provided. That's not necessarily trickling down to the participants of our survey, who were, for the most part, researchers. And certainly, as we saw for the question about the tenure and promotion policies, we haven't gotten open science necessarily into the fabric of institutions. And I think that's one thing that our working group is trying to do.
Yeah, and another finding that is key from the survey is that there's what we call a perception paradox, which is that people systematically underestimate their colleagues' positive attitudes towards open science, while simultaneously overestimating their implementation of open science.
Okay.
Right. So why is this happening? Why this disconnect? So one possible explanation of this is that what remains hidden is implementation challenges that other people are facing. So there's not enough conversation on those, and that positive attitudes are not as open as we think they are, right? So we believe that individually we are supporters of open science and that those values really matter to us, but that other people don't really value open science as much. So that's another thing that might be hidden at present, right? And that might require further discussion. So how do we go from here to a more supportive open science culture in institutions? And this is where the Open Science Working Group, we think, might be an answer, because that really allows intentional community building and support for open science advocacy that creates the spaces for dialogue and exchange. So maybe Krista can tell you a bit more about how we went from creating the group to a Senate resolution.
Yeah, so as you heard a bit from Nico, our Open Science Working Group is really a grassroots initiative. So, it's not something that was initiated by the administration. We don't receive particular support. It really is the individuals who are invested in open science and open scholarship across our university, which come from many units, including different departments of sciences, humanities, social sciences, as well as the library. And so through this collaborative process, we first wrote a report on open science at Concordia, open science and open scholarship, where we made some recommendations. And then one of those recommendations was to develop a Senate resolution. We heard about that in the introduction. Thank you for that. But building on the 2010 open access resolution, a resolution that would really support, encourage, and recognize open science at Concordia. And, of course, all of that wording is available online openly in Concordian Spectrum repository. But the idea here was really to affirm Concordia's values for open science and open scholarship. The next step will be to try to put those values into practice. And yeah, here we can see the link to that resolution. So I think that really is the challenge that we face. And I think a lot of working groups, maybe we'll hear from Stefanie about that, are facing that next challenge of taking this policy and these abstract commitments and then turning them into living practices that actually influence the daily working life of scholars and others and scientists. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for providing this context and talking about behind the scenes. I'm here today to talk a little bit about how at University of Ottawa, we first established an open science working group, which concluded with a set of recommendations, which now a year and a half or so later, we've turned into what we call the Open Science Action Committee. Action. This was leadership, by the way, like we didn't come up with this, but to actually take some of the recommendation and implement them. And I do remember, so we've had this kind of like grassroots trying to make something happen at leadership for so long. I've been at U Ottawa as a professor for 8 years now. And I've been trying to convince deans and, you know, like, well, mostly when you start, like no VP research will talk to you or know you even exist. But I also do, as you mentioned, I actually do research on research or science of science. Recently, people like to call it meta science, if you want to use the most recent buzzword. So I've been working in this space of scholarly communication and looking how that works, and open access and open science for, I think, a decade and a half, right? So like, there's also, if we look at our library colleagues, people that have been trying to advocate for open access for 20 years or longer, right? So it's a long time coming. And I just came back this summer from my first sabbatical, and I was in Berlin, in Germany, where I'm originally from. And if you come back to Canada and you see what's happening in Europe and Germany, we're so far behind. It's incredible. The good news about that is we can look at all the best practices of things that are already working. And I think my takeaway and what has finally been positive and what brought change at U Ottawa. So first of all, it takes a while to convince leadership. And we wanted to take this approach because we've been seeing librarians doing this work for so long, but nobody listens. I hear this from a lot of library colleagues that they have a really tough time to be heard. And then researchers only come to the library when stuff doesn't work, right? When like there's paywalls they can't get over, or when suddenly they're like, who pays my APCs? So what I think for the working group at U Ottawa that really worked well was that we looked at what you guys had done at the time. I think we looked a lot at U Calgary, who haven't done open science as such so much, but we looked a lot what they've been doing with DORA, the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment. And they had really great models, and we looked to that. And for us at U Ottawa, the key was really taking library leadership, so Talia Chung, the Dean of Libraries, but also the OVPRI, the Office of the Vice President Research, and those two, so Martine Lagacé is the Associate VP Research, and Talia Chung were the co-chairs of our working group. And suddenly, after really, I have a lot of great colleagues that are pro-open science, Kelly Kobe at the Ottawa Heart Institute, David Mower at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute, Mathieu Bourgontier, who's really pro-preprinting. A lot of people were trying to do grassroots and didn't get anywhere. So we're like, there needs to be some top-down action. And because we now had the power of the OVPRI, because that's where the money is, and that's where top-down decisions get made, and the skills and knowledge and resources from the library to lead this. And I have expertise because I do a lot of research on open science and open access. I was what did they call me? The special advisor to the chairs. And Leigh-Ann and I were leading for the working group every monthly meeting. And we really made a point out of evidence-based, because for decades, we've been hearing people, some that say open science is better. And we agree. I think open science is science done right. But we always get like, well, it's hard to implement. And the institution in my opinion, is really the missing link. And it's the linking it to the reward system, as Leigh-Ann mentioned earlier. That is what can bring change, but it takes a long time. And now going back to what we see, the evidence that we're using is we're doing analyses of where do U Ottawa authors publish? How much does it cost? Do we really need to do it that way? Is there the infrastructure we can use? But we also have recommendations that, and then based on what we see in Europe, I think the Netherlands are doing a fantastic job. They have a program, a national one that's called Room for Everyone's Talent, and they're linking open science implementation to assessment reform. So they're really saying, if we want people to publish open access and share their data, we need to actually reward that in the academic system. And I completely agree with both of you said is, it's not so much that our 10-year guidelines or even collective agreements are against open access. They're usually so vague that you can do whatever, you just have to argue your case. But I think the problem is that in people's heads, there is this fear of like, oh, I think my committee will want that I publish in high impact journals and, do it the old way. So I think what we're using now at U Ottawa in the Action Committee is to make things happen. And we're looking at where does it already happen well. And we can even look to the Global South in terms of open access publishing, that we're really advanced in terms of diamond open access. One really concrete action item that we suggested was like, why don't we say U Ottawa is going to give teaching reductions, because we all have a lot of teaching load. But if there is a professor who's actually the editor-in-chief of a diamond open access journal, why don't we say we support that? It's more labor, it's more getting funding. Why don't we say we're going to give them a course reduction so they can focus on that? So something very practical. Yep. And leaning on that, I actually brought a list today. I'm going to pass it around. As this week is Open Access Week, 13 items that anyone here, if you have reviewed, if you've ever contributed to a manuscript, if you're in the academic space, what you can do to make open access happen. And posting preprint is one that easy to do, but also there's a lot of power in not do something. So for example, you could also refuse to give your time and refuse to review for journals from exploitative publishers. So if you think that Elsevier doesn't deserve a 38% profit margins, well, maybe then stop reviewing for them for free. So some action items for us to keep the change going. And I think it's a combination of the grassroots and the people willing to do it, but also leadership, funders, university leadership to say we value this. And that means we're actually rewarding these practices, because right now we usually don't.
It's really great. Stefanie, I really think action is the word that you keep bringing up, and I'm really happy to hear these examples. I know we're running a little late. We started a little late, but I still want to give ample time to our last two discussants. So apologies for running a little late, but if you, I think we probably still have time for questions at the end, but I'll turn it over now to Josephine and to Gabriela. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi there. My name is Gabriela Petrov. As Ryan mentioned, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Theater, and I teach in the acting and performance creation programs. And I am also a contributor to a exciting forthcoming publication, open educational resource through the Center for Teaching and Learning. So I'll just speak a little bit about that project. So we're a group of, I think, around like 20 faculty and staff as well, who are engaged around the topic of contemplative pedagogies. And this started a few years ago now. We gathered a group of people around Concordia and also from outside of Concordia who were engaged with already or interested in this topic of contemplative pedagogies. Something that was very exciting for me was to come together with a group of people who were across many different departments and faculty, management, psychology, religions, fine arts, who were doing mindfulness practices in their classroom, using these tools over many, many years, had deep backgrounds in that area. But we had no idea that we were all kind of in the same place. And the group over years allowed us to kind of create this community and gathering place to mainly what I would describe as share practices. Like that's really been the main focus of our group, is to connect with the like necessarily practice-based work of contemplative pedagogy. And what's been really nice about sharing those practices is that it allows you to have an experience together. I mean, I'm even like now I'm thinking about my butt sitting in the chair and kind of connecting to the ground. I'm gonna go teach voice after this, so I have to also like stay connected to my breath. Anyway, I think what's really nice about that sharing of practices is it allowed us in this open educational resource project to have to contend with the challenge of articulating and sharing practice. And our resource has not only writing, but it has video, it has images, it kind of approaches through all the different languages we could bring together what we've been working on, a kind of archive of this discourse for the last years. There's videos of us doing practices and guiding practices. There are descriptions of practices, sometimes quite poetic in language, because I mean, as an artist and an educator in performance, like the facilitation is part of the performance practice for me. So to be able to have an opportunity to narrow down and articulate that language in a way that could be shared with other educators from a variety of disciplines is a really interesting challenge that I think this open educational resource has invited us to kind of struggle with. One example of kind of a way that we are kind of formalizing those practices is looking at, for example, the context. Where did this practice come from? What might be some evidence behind why this practice would be useful in a different context. There is growing evidence about the value of contemplative pedagogy in higher education, but sometimes we just don't have the same understanding of where that evidence is. Like there's, for example, a lot related to the field of psychology, but not or it's quite different in the field of fine arts and how contemplative practices are used in fine arts. For example, I did my MFA in contemporary performance at Naropa University, which is a pioneering institution in the field of contemplative education. And that's an environment where we really integrate contemplative practice and the arts, but that's not necessarily spoken about very often in the field of psychology and contemplative practice there. So there's so much to kind of learn from each other, and to put that all in one space and to have to articulate it and formalize it in a way that can kind of be followed by a person navigating that resource. I think that's been an interesting challenge, and maybe you can say more about that part of it.
So I'm Josephine. I'm the educational developer at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I lead the creation of open educational resources at the center. As Zoe mentioned earlier, this kind of partnership started between Center for Teaching and Learning and the library a couple of years ago through our colleague Ariel. But our department specifically works with instructors or other subject matter experts to develop specific instructor guides for teaching in their classrooms. So these are all published open access. So this current one is funded by the Ministère de l'Enseignement Supérieur. And it's our biggest project yet. So as Gabby mentioned, we have around 20 faculty collaborating, but also we were able to hire a research assistant student partner to work with us, as well as external collaborators also contributing knowledge to this resource. So overall, quite a big amount of people in this project, and also a really tight turnaround. So we received this grant earlier this year and have to finish by December. So creating this press books as a really highly collaborative project in a short timeline has been a big challenge for us. We did 5 co-writing sessions already this year, just meeting either in person or hybrid or online. And we just finished the peer review process within the group, and myself and the research assistant are working on transferring that to the press books now. So if you could skip ahead to 2 slides, we just wanted to share the working list of topics and sections that we have in this OER to come, and that should be published early next year. And so one of the key aspects of this is, though Pressbooks reads like as a book from beginning to end, we're going to be linking a lot through these pages. That's the nice thing about a digital format, is that we can kind of connect things. And so the reader themselves can take this contemplative journey throughout the book and not necessarily have to read it in a very linear manner. And it's also meant to be kind of a quilt or a patchwork reflection of this group of people that we have.
Terrific. Thank you so much for sharing that too. One thing that I'm really struck by here is the discussion that we keep kind of having about the range of different kinds of open access and how there are all these niches that the work that's being done by the people that have participated today serve either, you know, instructors, students, they serve larger academic disciplines, they serve either humanities and social sciences or the hard sciences, the STEM fields. Like it's a range of related efforts that I think are really worthwhile to like bring together into a group so that we can do these things to share and collaborate, not reinvent the wheel every single time. I was really impressed to hear about how Stefanie was saying that the Open Science Working Group at Concordia in a lot of ways made your work easier to put into action. So that's wonderful to know. I do want to open the floor to any questions that you may have here in person, online, or amongst the participants that are here at the table with me right now.
We have a question.
I see a question down
Question back
there
here
from Zoe.
Hello. I wanted to pose a question to Stefanie because you talked about the European context. And so this event is listed on International OA Week. And I, for the last 2 years, have been fascinated about the amount of European, specifically German, open access initiatives. And I wanted to just know more about it. Because again, it feels like there's such a large percentage from Europe, but Germany specifically, that I'm wondering if this is something done in legislation or a different university model. I'm very curious to learn.
Yeah, good question. And you know what? So I did my PhD in Germany and I came to Montreal for my postdoc, and then almost 13 years later, I'm still in Canada. So, you know, academia. So it's really interesting because I'm really been in the Canadian context for the last 12 or so years. And going back from my sabbatical, it was really eye-opening how many open access, also research projects, and that's what I do, right? Like I do science of science, and we have a really large grant right now from the Volkswagen Foundation, which is also a German, like the largest German non-government funder, and they have a research and research program, lots of open access funded there. And I was actually really surprised of how much is happening, but how much is actually in German only. And they publish a lot. Obviously, there are researchers that are very well connected in the international space. But when I was there, I discovered how many initiatives, resources are in the library, and also how many research projects are going on that are way more targeted at the national or at least German speaking community. So it was kind of like, oh, neat. I speak that language, so I get access to this. And now I can also bring some of this back. In terms of why, I think it's definitely a European thing. So, I mean, the DFG has had an open, so the German main funding government funder has had an open access policy for quite a while, but I wouldn't say that they're among the, it's more of a European push. I think that right now in Canada, we do have, everything that's going on in the world where the US has always been our largest collaborator, which makes a lot of sense. But now I think I hear this a lot with colleagues that do something called science diplomacy, and we see the funders also orienting themselves more towards Europe. And I think it's a really great sign that the tri-agencies basically, I don't know if you can say joined, but as Canadians, we can now participate in Horizon Europe grant funding. And that also means we have to now then apply those policies, right? So that means we have to step up our game. And I think the tri-agency open access policy revision that we're all waiting for which I think will probably be more pushed towards early next year. But I think that's for very good reasons. I have to say that it's been really great to see how they've been having these community consultations in Canada to take into account best practices, and that we're moving more towards that. I think something that is really big in Germany right now and Europe in general is diamond open access. And I think we should look towards that. There's so many things popping up to show us there's really good already established journals that don't charge authors because they're not geared at making profits. And yeah, but in that context, Diamond, we also need to look towards the Global South. They've been doing it for 20 years. So there's lots to learn from the non-North American and non-Western way maybe of scholarly communication.
Any other questions from, I see a couple of hands going up.
I'm right next door, but I'm one of the associate editors on one of the open textbooks, the biological anthropology one, and it's been an incredible experience. And it shows what you've been talking about, where we can have different professors, in this case, Dr. Celinda Hess, adopt a originally existing textbook and re-implement it for Concordia and with more Quebec related information. But my question is more surrounded about how does the open scholarship program see themselves interacting with student-led projects such as student-led journals? One I can think of off the top of my head would be the one that's here at home in Concordia. The UPA and geography program have the Roundabout Journal for Open Urban Geography, but I know there are other projects like that. Does open scholarship see themselves involving themselves in aiding students in creating projects like this, or is it just for the faculty and other stuff around that?
Anybody want to handle this one? Ah, we've got a response from a former participant on the stage. Great.
So at the University of Ottawa, I was talking a little bit about our library publishing program, and we support student-led publishing initiatives. And one of the key pieces there is having a faculty mentor with the students. But we have students who are publishing journals, they're at the undergraduate level and graduate level, connecting with a faculty mentor and then setting up a plan and then approaching the library. I'm sure Concordia has a library publishing program. I know McGill does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finding out who within the library is is leading some of this open scholarship. Well, you have your Concordia's AUL here in front of me for the open scholarship department. But the University of Ottawa library uses OJS, and we have a very specific service model. There's an agreement. You have to fill in certain information. There's certain requirements, but there are existing programs within libraries that definitely support student-run projects.
Thought I saw another hand, maybe from, yeah, there we go at the back.
Hi, I'm just curious about, is this open access accessible to only the participating universities, faculty and students, or is it open to general public as well?
General public is really the mandate for it. That's what I would say. So that's really the case for us. Our books are all available for free at press.library.concordia.ca. You can scroll through everything that we published. I know institutional repositories often look a little bit clunky, like it's a university database, but like you can I think in almost all cases just click a PDF and there that information is for free. That's often journal articles that have been funded by an agency that has a mandate to ensure that the public has access to this material. Sometimes there are delays on that. There'll be like, you can only like 12 months, but often it's like immediate. We were talking about Diamond open access, which means like immediate, and that they're not charging authors for that that facilitation of open access. So The idea here is for it to not just be closed and within the university, but really reaching public readers as well.
Can I
Please.
maybe add in the context of, if you have maybe not heard of open access, the underlying idea was never to make authors pay instead of readers, but the idea was in the, end of the 90s, early 2000s, hey, we have the internet now. We no longer need to distribute scientific articles on paper. And we really needed publishers for that because that's hard to organize, like you actually have to ship out things by snail mail. If some of people, like the students in the room, probably not even remember this time. But it was the idea, hey, we can put everything up on a server, and that's also very cheap to do. So the idea, and this goes back to the Budapest Declaration of Open Access, is actually that it should be, yes, free for everyone. So if you have an internet connection, you can read scientific literature for free, because that's actually a human right. Access to scientific knowledge is a human right. But also that a lot of people always forget is that it's not only access, but it's to read, but it's also any reuse rights for any purposes, including commercial purposes, which now has become very relevant too in the context of large language models and AI, because a lot of these big AI companies are now using scientific literature, but anything out on the web, but stuff that's really available to train their models to. So there's a whole nother layer, and maybe even a negative part of people are saying, I want to close my things up again because I don't want my content to be exploited. And Creative Commons is working on something called preference signals to at least call out the good and bad actors in AI to say, like, are you just extracting or are you giving back? But it's then been the for-profit publishers mostly that in a print world were already doing very well, but they actually had to also invest money to print. And now it's basically uploading a PDF to the server that we've heard now we can do openly through libraries, to open source and open infrastructure. And we don't need these publishers anymore, but they are making a lot of money. Elsevier has for the last 10 years had a profit margin of 38%. And I just want you to think this through. It's a shareholder company. So for every, let's say, $1,000 that Concordia author spends on an article processing charge, and that would still be very cheap. They're much higher, actually. For every $1,000 we spend to Elsevier, $380 go to the smart people that bought Elsevier stock. So that's usually taxpayer money that leaves the system. And the fact that APC has become the dominant model is all because for-profit publishers want to make profit. And so I think it's a lot about the theme of this year's Open Access Week. I think we haven't even said is who owns our knowledge? So I think that's something to think about. We can technically and practically already organize all of publishing on open infrastructure for costs money, but it costs a very small fraction of what the publishers are making us pay. So it's time for us to take back the action, which is also these 13 items that I handed out earlier, is how we can practically do that.
Yeah, thank you. And just to say that it is Open Access Week, and we've been focusing a lot on open access. In our survey, we actually found open access was the part of open science and open scholarship that people are most familiar with. It's been around, and there's really been a wonderful push, and I think we're making a lot of headway. But just to remind us all that open science and open scholarship encompass so many more practices as well. So something that people might be familiar with is open source software. So sometimes when you download software from the internet, it's free, it's open source. And that's actually because the code behind it is available online. Anybody can look at it. Anybody can check what's inside, and anybody can contribute. This is another familiar example, but as we are working scientists with Nico, we have also open materials. So when we run a study with infants, we show them certain videos. Those are available online for anyone in the public to see. What do you show those babies in your experiments? What's your data look like? All the data is available in the code where we run our statistical analyses. So these are just some of the examples of the many open science and open scholarship practices that we can think of and hopefully promote at our universities and beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was just, since my current area of research that I'm currently focused on is education in the upcoming age of AI, where I don't see any value for standard curriculum, So this open access is a breath of fresh air for all the people who wants to learn. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your question. Any other questions from the audience or any online? Thanks for sticking with us for an extra 20 minutes or so. It's good to know that there's so much to talk about. There's always more to talk about. I encourage you to make further inquiries into what you can do to support open access. Read open access works. If you're making publishing decisions, decide to work with nonprofit open access publishers or journals. I don't see any other hands. So let me just thank all of our participants today for sharing the work that they're doing. I'm really grateful for always learning about these things that are outside of my areas of expertise. I think that we're all dedicated to lifelong learning and making education more accessible for all. So thank you very much. Round of applause for everybody here.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks everyone for coming in, also for the questions. We're going to leave there was a QR code we just put up for the open access survey. So for the people who are in the space can grab that there. We're going to close up the Zoom and the live stream now. This remains available on our YouTube channel, so you can revisit it there. And I definitely want you to have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.